The evening sun cast long shadows through the windows of the Golden Gate restaurant as Mai wiped down another table, her tired feet reminding her she'd been on double shifts for the past 3 weeks. The elegant restaurant sat perched on one of San Francisco's famous hills, offering breathtaking views of the bay to its wealthy patrons while its staff rushed around in crisp black uniforms, trying to make ends meet. Mai had been here for 3 years now, every dollar she earned carefully saved and sent back home for her little sister's heart condition. Some days were harder than others, but tonight was different. The restaurant's exclusive piano room had been booked for a private party hosted by Richard Thompson, a tech billionaire known for his lavish celebrations and demanding nature. The piano room was May's favorite part of the restaurant, though she never told anyone why. During quiet moments between shifts, she would sometimes stand in the doorway, looking at the magnificent Steinway grand piano that sat in the corner. It gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, its polished surface reflecting the warm lighting like a mirror. She never dared to touch it, but sometimes her fingers would twitch at her sides, muscle memory from a different life trying to break free. As she arranged the fresh flowers on the tables, following the event coordinator's precise instructions, Mai could hear the other servers whispering about the upcoming party. "Thompson's parties are always wild," one of them said. "Last time, he had acrobats performing between courses." Another chimed in. "I heard he's bringing in some Silicon Valley hotshots tonight. Big deals being made, you know." May just nodded and continued her work, making sure each detail was perfect. She couldn't afford to lose this job, not with her sister's next treatment coming up. The medical bills kept piling up back home, and even with insurance, the specialized care wasn't cheap. Every tip, every extra shift mattered. The first guests started arriving at 7, filling the room with expensive perfumes and loud laughter. Mai moved efficiently between tables, her black shoes silent on the plush carpet, as she balanced trays of champagne and carefully plated appetizers. She had mastered the art of being invisible, present enough to anticipate needs but unseen enough to not disturb conversations. The party was in full swing when Thompson himself arrived, fashionably late and surrounded by an entourage of tech executives and venture capitalists. The volume in the room seemed to double as people gravitated toward him, everyone wanting to be part of his orbit. Mai watched from the corner of her eye as she served another round of drinks, noting how he commanded attention without even trying. As the night wore on, the piano sat untouched, its presence almost forgotten amidst the networking and deal-making. The kitchen had just sent out the main course when May heard someone call for more wine at table 3. She hurried over, carefully maneuvering through the crowd with a fresh bottle. That's when she noticed one of Thompson's guests watching her. There was something unsettling about his gaze, made worse by the several empty glasses in front of him. May tried to focus on her task, but she could feel his eyes following her movements. She had dealt with difficult customers before, but something about this one made her stomach churn. She was just about to retreat to the safety of the kitchen when his loud voice cut through the dinner chatter. "Hey, you, waitress," he called out, making several heads turn. Mai froze, her heart suddenly pounding. She knew what came next wouldn't be good, but there was nowhere to hide. Little did anyone know that this moment would change everything, not just for Mai, but for everyone in that room. The guest who had called out to May was wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than her yearly salary. His face was flushed from too much wine, and his voice carried that particular tone of someone used to getting their way. "Those hands of yours," he said, pointing at her. "They're too elegant for carrying plates. I bet you play something, don't you?" May's throat went dry. She clutched the wine bottle closer to her chest, trying to make herself smaller. "I'm sorry, sir, but I need to attend to other tables," she said quietly, attempting to step away. But the man wouldn't have it. "No, no," he insisted, getting louder. "Look at her hands, everyone. Those are pianists' hands. Other guests started turning to look, their conversations dying down as they sensed entertainment brewing. Maya could feel her cheeks burning as more eyes turned toward her. Thompson, who had been deep in conversation at his table, looked up with mild interest. "What's all this about?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone who owned not just the party, but seemingly the air everyone was breathing. The drunk guest stood up, swaying slightly. "Our little waitress here," he announced, "is hiding something. Those are artists' hands. I studied music at Juilliard, and I can spot a musician's hands from across the room." He gestured dramatically toward the Steinway. "I say we make her play something." May's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear anything else. One of her fellow servers, Lynn, tried to intervene. "Sir, we're not allowed to." But Thompson cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Actually, this could be interesting," Thompson said, setting down his wine glass. The room fell silent, waiting for his next words. "The piano's just been sitting there all night. Might as well get some use out of it." He turned to May, his expression unreadable. "Well, how about it?" May's hands started trembling. "Please, Mr. Thompson, I'm just here to serve." "I don't." "Come now," Thompson interrupted, his tone friendly, but with an edge that made it clear this wasn't really a request. "Just one piece. Consider it part of your service tonight." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Unless, of course, you prefer to find another position elsewhere." The threat was subtle but clear. May looked around desperately, but she could see no escape. The other servers were looking at the floor, unable to help. The guests were watching with various expressions, some embarrassed, others amused, a few actually looking excited at the prospect of impromptu entertainment. The restaurant manager, who had been hovering nearby, stepped forward nervously. "Mr. Thompson, our insurance policy doesn't usually." "I'll take full responsibility," Thompson said dismissively. "Now, young lady, we're waiting." Mai felt like she was underwater. Everything seemed distant and muffled. She hadn't touched a piano in 8 years, not since that final recital in Hong Kong, not since the day she learned about her sister's diagnosis. She had locked that part of her life away, buried it deep where it couldn't hurt anymore. But now, standing in this room full of strangers who saw her as nothing more than evening entertainment, Mai felt something else stirring beneath her fear and humiliation. A tiny spark of defiance, of pride, of who she used to be before life forced her to become someone else. With legs that felt like they were made of lead, Mai handed the wine bottle to Lynn and walked toward the piano. The crowd parted before her like she was walking to her execution. The Steinway waited, its lid already up, its keys gleaming like teeth in the chandelier light. As she sat down on the bench, adjusting it with mechanical precision born from years of training, May could hear whispers rippling through the crowd. She placed her hands in her lap, taking one deep breath, then another. 8 years of dust seemed to fall away from her memories as she lifted her hands to the keys. What happened next would leave everyone in that room absolutely speechless. 8 years earlier, in a sunlit practice room at the Hong Kong Academy of Music, a younger Mai had sat before another piano, her fingers dancing across the keys as her instructor nodded approvingly. She had been preparing for the international competition that would launch her career, a dream she carried since she first touched a piano at age 4. The practice room's walls had been covered with competition posters and concert announcements. May's name had appeared on several of them, always near the top. Her mother had collected every single one, carefully preserving them in a scrapbook that still sat untouched in a box under May's bed. That particular afternoon, her instructor had just finished praising her interpretation of Rachmaninoff when her mother appeared in the doorway, face pale and foam clutched in her trembling hand. The news about her little sister's heart condition changed everything in an instant. The practice room's warm sunlight suddenly felt cold, and the music that had filled May's entire world faded into silence. The decision wasn't really a decision at all. The competition money would have launched her career, but instead, it went to her sister's first surgery. The prestigious scholarship she'd earned for further studies in Vienna was declined so she could work and help with medical bills. One by one, all those carefully laid plans were packed away, like sheet music that would never be played again. Now, sitting at the Steinway in the Golden Gate restaurant, May could feel the weight of those memories pressing down on her shoulders. The drunk guest who demanded she play was still watching, a smug smile on his face. Thompson sat at his table, phone in hand, probably already thinking about who he'd hire to replace her after she embarrassed herself. But they didn't know of the countless hours she'd spent practicing until her fingers ached. They didn't know about the standing ovations, the critics' reviews, or the way her music teacher had cried when she announced she was leaving. They didn't know that every night, after her double shifts, she would fall asleep with her fingers moving slightly, playing invisible pieces on an invisible piano. Mai looked down at her hands resting on the keys. They were different now. A few small burns from hot plates, a paper cut from folding napkins, calluses from carrying heavy trays. But underneath the waitress's hands, her pianist's hands were still there, waiting. She thought about her sister, now 16, who had never given up fighting despite all the surgeries and setbacks, who still smiled and told May to follow her dreams, not knowing that May's dreams had changed the day she learned what it truly meant to love someone more than music. The room had grown so quiet that May could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning. The crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, each tiny light like a star in a universe that had brought her to this moment. She remembered her old teacher's words. Music isn't just in your hands, it's in your heart. And as long as your heart beats, the music will always be there. May closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and felt the familiar smoothness of the keys beneath her fingertips. For a moment, she was transported back to her last performance, before everything changed. She had played Rachmaninoff then, too. His Piano Concerto No. 2. It was a piece about darkness and light, about loss and redemption, about finding your way back from the depths of despair. She thought about all the times she'd walked past this piano, pretending not to see it while her heart ached to play just one note. About all the nights she'd lain awake, wondering if she'd made the right choice. About her sister's smile when she'd successfully completed her last round of therapy. The pressure of the moment, the weight of 8 years of silence, the shocked faces of the party guests, all of it faded away. Mai took another deep breath, and in the split second before her fingers began to move, she realized something. Sometimes the most beautiful music comes from a heart that's been broken and put back together again. The first notes filled the room like drops of rain before a storm. May's fingers moved slowly at first, almost hesitantly, as if remembering a language they hadn't spoken in years. The opening chords of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 rolled through the space, deep and haunting. The drunk guest who had demanded she play sat up straighter, the smirk falling from his face. Thompson stopped looking at his phone. Around the room, conversations died mid-sentence as heads turned toward the piano. Then, like a dam breaking, the music burst forth in earnest. May's fingers flew across the keys, drawing out the powerful melody that had lived in her heart for 8 years. The piano responded to her touch as if it had been waiting just for her, its rich tones filling every corner of the room. A wine glass clinked softly as someone set it down, forgotten. A server stood frozen, tray still lifted, watching May with wide eyes. The kitchen staff had begun peeking through the service doors, drawn by the music that was now flowing through the entire restaurant. Mai didn't see any of this. Her eyes were closed, her world narrowed to just her hands and the keys beneath them. Each note was a memory. The smell of her mother's cooking on Sunday mornings when she practiced, the sound of her sister's laughter before the illness, the feeling of sunlight through practice room windows. The piece built in intensity, and Mai leaned into the crescendo. Her whole body moved with the music now, swaying slightly as her fingers struck the keys with perfect precision. The restaurant's expensive silverware vibrated softly on the tables with the piano's deeper notes. Someone gasped as she launched into a particularly complex passage, her hands blurring with speed. The drunk guest who'd started all this had tears in his eyes now, his earlier cruelty forgotten in the face of such beauty. Even Thompson sat completely still, his usual air of superiority replaced by genuine awe. In the back of the room, an older woman in an elegant black dress stood up slowly, moving closer to the piano. She watched May with an intensity that was different from the other guests, not just impressed, but calculating, professional. Her eyes followed May's hands with the sharp focus of someone who knew exactly how difficult this piece was. The music swelled, filling the space with emotion that couldn't be put into words. It spoke of lost and love, of dreams put aside but never forgotten, of the kind of sacrifice that changes you forever. May's uniform was damp with sweat now, her carefully done hair coming loose, but none of that mattered. She played like she was finally telling her story, every note a word she hadn't been able to say. The loneliness of leaving her old life behind, the exhaustion of double shifts, the worry about her sister's health, the fear of losing this job. It all poured out through her fingers and into the piano. One of the younger servers had tears streaming down her face. Lynn, who had taken the wine bottle from Mai earlier, stood with her hand over her mouth. They'd worked beside her for months, never knowing, never suspecting what she carried inside her. The piece moved toward its conclusion, the notes becoming more powerful, more insistent. May's fingers struck the keys with a strength that belied her small frame. The music filled the room like a living thing, demanding to be heard, refusing to be ignored. As she approached the final measures, May opened her eyes for the first time since she'd begun playing. The chandelier light caught the tears on her cheeks, but her hands never faltered. The last chords rang out, powerful and decisive, hanging in the air like a question waiting to be answered. Then, silence. For one eternal moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The final notes seemed to hover in the air, as if the world itself was holding its breath. May's hands rested on the keys, trembling slightly from emotion and effort. What happened next would change not just her life, but the lives of everyone who witnessed this moment. The silence lasted for 3 heartbeats. Then the room exploded with applause, startling May so much she nearly fell off the piano bench. People were standing, cheering, some wiping tears from their faces. The drunk guest who had started it all was openly sobbing into his napkin. Thompson had risen from his chair, his usual controlled expression replaced by genuine amazement. Even the kitchen staff, still watching through the service doors, were clapping with their hands held high above their heads. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, bouncing off the walls and crystal chandeliers. May's hands were shaking as she tried to stand. Her legs felt weak, like she'd run a marathon. 8 years of holding back, of keeping this part of herself locked away, had taken more energy than she'd realized. Now that the door was open, she felt both empty and somehow more complete than she had in years. The elegant woman in the black dress was making her way through the crowd, people automatically stepping aside for her. As she got closer, May noticed the pearl necklace she wore, the confident way she carried herself. There was something familiar about her, something May couldn't quite place. "I knew I recognized those hands," the woman said, her voice carrying over the continued applause. "Hong Kong International Competition, 2015. You were scheduled to perform this exact piece." She smiled, warm but professional. "I was one of the judges. I've always wondered what happened to you." May's heart stopped. This was Mrs. Chen, the famous concert pianist and director of the Bay Area Symphony Orchestra. She had been on countless competition panels, had performed with orchestras around the world. And she remembered May. May's voice cracked. She cleared her throat, very aware of her waitress uniform, her messy hair, the small burn on her hand from a hot plate earlier that evening. "My sister got sick. I had to." Mrs. Chen held up a hand, her expression softening. You don't need to explain. Life has a way of changing our planned routes, doesn't it? She glanced around the room, then back at May. But sometimes it also has a way of bringing us exactly where we need to be. The crowd had grown quiet again, listening intently. Thompson had moved closer, his earlier arrogance replaced by something that looked almost like shame. The drunk guest who had demanded she play was being quietly let out by his colleagues, still wiping his eyes. The thing is, Mrs. Chen continued, I'm starting a new community music program at the symphony, teaching children from all backgrounds, especially those who couldn't normally afford lessons. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. We need teachers who understand both music and life, who know that sometimes the most important things aren't written in the score. Mai stared at the card, unable to move. Lin appeared beside her, gently taking it when May's trembling hands couldn't seem to reach for it. The other servers had gathered closer, forming a protective circle around their colleague, who had suddenly become something more than just another waitress. But my sister, May started, thinking of the medical bills, the treatments still needed. The teaching position includes full health insurance for family members. Mrs. Chen said quietly, as if she could read May's thoughts, and the schedule would be flexible. She smiled again, this time with a hint of mischief. The salary is also considerably better than waiting tables, even at establishments as fine as this one. Thompson stepped forward then, clearing his throat. I believe we've all been reminded tonight about making assumptions, he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone unused to admitting mistakes. Whatever you decide, your job here is secure. In fact, I think we need to discuss a raise and perhaps some time off for other pursuits. Mai felt tears rolling down her cheeks again, but these were different from the ones she'd shed while playing. These were tears of possibility, of doors opening instead of closing. She looked around the room, at her fellow servers who were beaming with pride, at the guests who now saw her as a person instead of just the help, at Mrs. Chen, who was waiting patiently for her answer. And for the first time in 8 years, Mai felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Someone had recorded May's performance on their phone. By the next morning, the video was everywhere, spreading across social media like wildfire. The caption read, Waitress forced to play piano at rich guy's party. What happens next will move you to tears. The video captured everything. The initial humiliation, the transformation as she began to play, the raw emotion of the music, and the stunned silence that followed. Comments poured in by the thousands. I can't stop crying. The way her whole body changes when she starts playing. It's like watching someone come back to life. That's Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Do you know how difficult that piece is? This isn't just good, this is world-class talent. The story about her sister in the comments. I'm speechless. Sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the deepest pain. Local news stations picked up the story. A reporter showed up at the Golden Gate restaurant, hoping to interview May. She found the young waitress still in her uniform, still serving tables, still humble despite her newfound internet fame. I just want to clarify something, Mai told the reporter during a quick break between tables. Everyone's painting this as a story about humiliation turned to triumph. But it's really a story about love. Everything I did, every choice I made, was because of love for my sister. The reporter's eyes softened. She'd come expecting a viral sensation story, but found something much deeper. As Mai spoke about her sister's battle with heart disease, about the years of working double shifts, about the dreams she'd set aside, the story took on a different tone. That evening, the news segment aired. Behind the viral piano performance, a sister's love. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Viewers were touched not just by May's talent, but by her dedication to her family. A local children's hospital reached out, offering to review her sister's case. A crowdfunding page appeared, started by one of the restaurant's regular customers. Let's help May's sister so May can teach others, the description read. Within hours, donations began pouring in, not just from locals, but from people around the world who had seen the video. Mrs. Chin's phone didn't stop ringing. Other music schools and orchestras wanted to know about the mysterious pianist-turned-waitress. But she had already made up her mind about May. Some musicians play perfectly, but without soul, she told her colleagues. May plays with every piece of her heart. That's what we need to teach our students. The restaurant became unexpectedly busy. People came hoping to see May, to hear her play. Thompson, perhaps trying to make amends, had the Steinway tuned and invited May to play whenever she wanted. During her breaks, she would sometimes sit down and play a piece or two, filling the restaurant with music that made people pause, listen, and remember what it felt like to dream. One regular customer, an elderly man who came for lunch every Tuesday, told Mai something that stuck with her. "You know," he said, after she finished playing a gentle Chopin nocturne, "some people think success means never giving up on your dreams. But sometimes, the biggest success is giving up one dream to make room for something even more important. And then, if you're very lucky, life finds a way to give you both." The drunk guest who had demanded she play never returned to the restaurant, but he sent a long letter of apology along with a generous contribution to her sister's medical fund. "You reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place," he wrote. "Thank you for turning my cruelty into something beautiful." Mai kept all the messages, all the news clippings, all the comments. Not out of pride, but as a reminder that sometimes life's hardest moments can lead to unexpected blessings. She added them to the box under her bed, right next to the old competition posters from Hong Kong. But the most meaningful response came from her sister, who called crying after seeing the video. "I always felt guilty," she confessed, "that you gave up everything for me." May had to wipe away tears as she replied, "I never gave up everything. I just found something more precious to hold on to." There was a pause, then her sister asked softly, "Will you play for me when I come to visit?" 3 months after that unforgettable night at the Golden Gate restaurant, May stood in front of a small classroom at the Bay Area Community Music Center. Sunlight streamed through large windows, falling on 5 donated pianos and the eager faces of her first group of students. The room wasn't as fancy as the restaurant's piano room. The pianos weren't Steinways, and the floor was scuffed from years of music stands being dragged around. But to Mai, it felt more beautiful than any luxury venue she'd ever performed in. Her students came from all walks of life. There was a young boy whose mother worked 3 jobs to make ends meet, just like Mai had. A teenage girl who reminded May of her sister, with the same determined spark in her eyes. An elderly woman who had always wanted to learn, but never had the chance. Each of them had their own story, their own reason for being there. Music isn't just about getting the notes right, Mai told them during their first lesson, remembering her own teacher's words from long ago. It's about what's in your heart, and everyone's heart has a song worth sharing. The community had continued to rally around May and her sister. The crowdfunding campaign had exceeded all expectations, raising enough money to cover not just the remaining medical treatments, but also to start a scholarship fund for other families facing similar struggles. The children's hospital that had reached out turned out to have a specialist who knew of a new treatment option. May's sister had responded well to it, and for the first time in 8 years, the doctors were using words like significant improvement and long-term stability. Mai still worked at the restaurant, but only 2 nights a week. Thompson had insisted she keep some shifts, not because she needed to, but because customers had come to look forward to her brief performances during dinner service. The piano that had once been merely decoration had become the heart of the restaurant. One evening, as Mai was preparing to leave after her shift, she found Lynn arranging flowers near the piano. "Remember how you used to just stare at it?" Lynn asked, smiling. "Now other servers do the same thing when you play. You've given everyone permission to dream again." The drunk guest's letter wasn't the only one May received. Others wrote to share their own stories of dreams deferred, sacrifices made, and hopes rekindled. A mother wrote about watching the video with her daughter who wanted to quit piano lessons. Now she practices every day. The letter said, not to become famous, but because she understands that music is about love. Mrs. Chen's community music program flourished, with May's story attracting both students and donors. What we're doing here, Mrs. Chen would say, is not just teaching music. We're teaching that it's never too late to reconnect with your passion, that detours in life don't have to be dead ends. But the most meaningful moment came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. May's sister had finally been cleared to travel, and she sat in the empty classroom, watching May play the same Rachmaninoff piece that had changed everything. When she finished, her sister hugged her tightly. "You know what the doctors said?" Her sister whispered. "They said having something to live for, to fight for, made a difference in my recovery. Your love kept me alive. And now your music is giving that same love to others." Mai looked around the classroom. At the music sheets scattered on stands, the small plants her students had brought to brighten the windowsills, the wall where she'd hung her old competition posters next to her students' first recital announcements. Everything had come full circle. That evening, Mai sat at the restaurant Steinway one last time before heading home. As her fingers touched the keys, she played something new. Not Rachmaninoff or Chopin, but a piece she'd written herself. It was a melody about second chances, about dreams that die and are reborn, about how love can lead you down unexpected paths that turn out to be exactly where you were meant to go all along. And somewhere in those notes was the most important lesson of all. Sometimes life's greatest music comes not from the grand concert halls or perfect moments, but from the hearts that keep playing even when the world seems to have stopped listening.